She once fought with a millionaire, but ended up signing his contract proposal. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The ballroom glowed with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Guests in gowns worth more than a year's rent clinked glasses of champagne, while photographers captured every smile. At the center of it all was an auction paintings, jewelry, and even a rare diamond tiara, each item fetching bids that soared past 6 figures as though the money were pocket change. And then, the unexpected happened. Among the servers, moving swiftly through the crowd, was a young woman in a simple black uniform, carrying a tray of drinks. Her steps were steady, but her eyes carried the weight of responsibility far beyond her years. She was not supposed to draw attention, yet in a room of calculated perfection, it was her presence that would soon ignite whispers. A guest arrogant, flushed from too much wine, tried to snatch a glass from her tray with careless force. The tray tilted, and one glass slipped, splashing crimson wine across the sleeve of a man's custom-tailored suit. The man turned sharply, and silence spread through the hall like a storm front. It was him, the youngest millionaire in the city, known for ruthless deals and an icy composure that intimidated even his competitors. The ruined sleeve belonged to him. Gasps rose from the crowd. Someone muttered, "She is finished." Another whispered, "He sues people for less than that." Lie. But instead of crumbling under the weight of his stare, the young woman lifted her chin. Her voice was steady, almost defiant. "If the cost of this suit is more than the respect you give to people, then perhaps it was not worth wearing in the first place." The words cut through the silence like a blade. A server had just challenged a millionaire in front of the city's elite. A low murmur filled the room. Phones were lifted discreetly, recording. Was this bravery or sheer foolishness? The man's eyes narrowed, not with rage, but with intrigue. No one had spoken to him like that in years. He did not reply. Instead, he removed a sleek fountain pen from his pocket, the kind that had signed contracts worth millions, and held it in his hand as though considering something far beyond the moment. The crowd expected him to explode, to humiliate her, to make an example out of defiance. Instead, he simply turned and walked away, leaving behind a silence so thick that every heartbeat could be heard. The young woman stood frozen, the tray trembling slightly in her grasp. She had no idea that this single confrontation, this unusual spark of defiance in the wrong place at the wrong time, would set her on a path leading straight into his world, and into a proposal no one could have predicted. The cameras at the charity auction eventually shifted their focus back to glittering diamonds and overpriced art, but the tension left by that moment did not fade. The young woman returned to her duties, carrying trays as if nothing had happened, yet her heart still raced. She had dared to speak to a millionaire in front of an entire ballroom. To everyone else, it was a spectacle. To her, it was simply standing up for her dignity. Later that evening, as the event ended and staff began cleaning, she stepped out into the cool night air. The neon lights of the city glowed across the street, a reminder that her world was very different from the one inside that ballroom. She clutched her small purse, thinking about the overdue hospital bills for her mother, and the extra shifts she would need to cover them. She did not know that she was being watched. The man with the ruined sleeve had not forgotten her words. In fact, he had replayed them in his mind several times. Women usually tried to flatter him, to get close, or to impress him. No one had ever dared to cut through his armor with honesty. That was why, instead of leaving in one of his expensive cars, he lingered outside, waiting. When she finally noticed him standing near the valet station, her steps faltered. His presence was impossible to ignore, tall, perfectly composed, with the kind of quiet authority that drew attention without effort. She did not want another confrontation. She only wanted to go home. "You have courage," he said at last, his voice calm, measured, but carrying weight. She frowned. "I have respect. There is a difference." That answer caught him off guard. He studied her, almost as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then his gaze shifted toward the hospital bracelet peeking out from her purse, the one she had kept from visiting her mother earlier that week. It was a detail she thought no one would notice. He noticed everything. The silence stretched before he spoke again. "You need money." Her chest tightened. "So what if I do?" "That does not mean I will bow to you." A faint smile crossed his lips, not mocking, but calculating. "I do not need you to bow. I need you to sign." Her eyebrows knit together. "Sign what?" He drew the same fountain pen from his pocket, the one that had caught her attention earlier. From his inner coat, he unfolded a sheet of paper. It was not a business contract. It was something stranger, almost unbelievable. "A marriage agreement," he said plainly. "You will be my wife, temporarily. 1 year." She stared, convinced he was joking. "This is absurd." But his expression never wavered. "It is practical. My family is demanding a marriage before the end of the year. If I refuse, I lose control of everything I have built. You are honest, strong-willed, and you are not impressed by wealth. That makes you perfect." "Oh," her breath caught, torn between laughter and outrage. "You insulted me in front of everyone, and now you are offering me a business proposal disguised as a marriage? Why would I ever agree to that?" His eyes, sharp and unwavering, locked on hers. "Because the money you will receive will cover every hospital bill your mother has, and because despite what you say, you are tired of fighting battles alone." The night seemed to hold its breath around them. The city's noise faded into the background. She stood there, shocked by the audacity of his words, by the fact that a man she had only fought with hours ago was now offering her something that could change her life forever. She wanted to scream at him, to walk away, to never see him again. Yet the reality of her circumstances pressed heavily on her chest. Her mother's face in that hospital bed, the letters marked overdue, the fear of losing everything. And in his hand, that pen gleamed under the streetlight, waiting for her answer. What she did not know was that this was not only about saving his empire. This was about something else he had not admitted, even to himself. She was not just an option. She was a challenge he could not walk away from. Her first instinct was to laugh in his face. The idea of marrying a millionaire she barely knew, let alone one she had clashed with only hours ago, was too ridiculous to even consider. She shook her head and stepped back from him, clutching her purse tighter. "I am not for sale," she said firmly, her voice trembling but steady enough to draw a line. "Keep your pen, keep your contract. I will find another way." He slipped the fountain pen back into his jacket pocket, his expression unreadable. "You have pride," he said, almost to himself. "But pride does not pay hospital bills." That cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement, determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing her doubt. She believed she could push his outrageous offer out of her mind. But reality has a way of tightening its grip. The next morning, she sat in the cramped hospital room, where her mother lay sleeping. The steady beep of the monitor was a cruel reminder of the bills piling higher every week. She had already begged for extensions, taken extra shifts, and sold the few valuables she had left. Still, it was not enough. She traced the lines of her mother's hand, frail and cool against her palm, and for the first time in years, she felt truly powerless. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. One line only. "My offer still stands. I will not ask again." She almost deleted it. But then the nurse came in, holding yet another invoice. The number at the bottom made her stomach twist. There was no miracle waiting for her. No sudden windfall. No one to help. That evening, when she returned to her small apartment, she found an envelope waiting at the door. Heavy paper, embossed with his family crest. Inside was the contract, a year of marriage. An allowance that would erase her debts and secure her mother's treatment. A clause that ended everything cleanly after 12 months. No strings. No lingering claims. At the bottom, a blank space for her signature. Her hands shook as she held the document. Every line screamed of control, of being tied to a man she did not trust. Yet every word also promised survival. She stared at the blank space, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The next day, she met him at his office, a glass tower that looked down on the city as if it belonged to him. He sat behind a sleek desk, the contract placed neatly before him. His fountain pen gleamed in his hand once again, as though waiting for her surrender. "This is wrong," she said, her voice low. "Then walk away," he replied calmly. "But you already know the cost of that choice." She hated him in that moment for his arrogance, for the way he had trapped her, for knowing exactly how desperate she had become. But beneath that hatred was fear. Fear of losing her mother. Fear of watching everything collapse because of pride. Her fingers hovered over the pen. She thought of the nights she had gone hungry so her mother could eat. She thought of the endless hospital corridors, the smell of antiseptic, the weight of bills in her purse, and then she closed her hand around it. The pen felt cold, heavy, like chains disguised in silver. She signed her name. The sound of ink scratching across the paper sealed her fate. When she set the pen down, he reached for the contract, his expression as unreadable as ever. "From this moment," he said, his tone clipped and final, "you are my wife." She lifted her eyes to his, a storm of defiance and fear swirling inside her. She had agreed to his terms, but she silently vowed one thing. She would never let him break her spirit. What neither of them knew was that this contract, meant to bind them for convenience, would become the spark that bound them far more tightly than either expected. The first morning after signing the contract did not feel like freedom. It felt like stepping into a world that did not belong to her. She stood in the entryway of his sprawling estate, her small suitcase dwarfed by marble columns and glass walls that caught the sunrise. The house staff moved efficiently, bowing their heads as if she had always been there. Yet their eyes revealed the truth, curiosity mixed with judgment. He appeared on the staircase above, perfectly pressed suit, not a hair out of place, looking like a man about to command a boardroom rather than greet his new wife. His voice carried no warmth. "You will have a room down the hall from mine. We will attend family dinners together. And when the press asks, you will smile. That is all." She swallowed her pride and nodded, even as his tone made her skin bristle. The contract had spoken of appearances, not affection, but living inside those cold words was different than reading them. The first test came quickly. That evening, his family gathered in the mansion's formal dining room, a table long enough to seat 20. His mother's diamonds glittered under the chandelier, his father's eyes sharp and appraising. They welcomed her with smiles that did not reach their eyes. "So," his father said smoothly, "this is the woman who tamed our son." She almost laughed at the irony, but forced herself to stay composed. "I did not tame him," she replied softly. "I only met him." The table grew silent for a beat, then filled with polite laughter, though she could feel the edge in their gazes. She had not played the part of the grateful, obedient bride. She had spoken with honesty again, and that was dangerous. After dinner, when the guests had gone, he cornered her in the hall. His eyes narrowed. "Do you enjoy provoking them?" She met his stare, unflinching. "I enjoy telling the truth." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. Days turned into weeks, and the routine of their marriage unfolded. She learned to walk beside him at public events, cameras flashing, strangers whispering. She smiled when expected, but never leaned on his arm. Behind closed doors, they barely spoke, except for moments when tension broke the silence. Once, during a thunderstorm, she found herself lost in the endless halls of his mansion. He discovered her standing on a balcony, rain dripping onto her hair, shivering slightly. Without a word, he draped his tailored jacket over her shoulders. Their eyes met briefly, something unspoken passing between them before he turned and walked away. Another time, she cooked a simple meal in the kitchen, pasta with tomato sauce. Nothing special, nothing fancy. He arrived unexpectedly, drawn by the scent. Sitting across from her, he took a bite, then paused, almost startled. "Better than the chef's," he admitted quietly. It was the first compliment he had given her, though his expression quickly returned to stone. She realized then that beneath his cold exterior was a man not used to warmth, not used to someone who did not want his money or his power. And though she fought to keep her guard high, small cracks began to form. Still, the whispers followed them. At charity events, at board meetings, at dinner parties, people stared. "She married him for his fortune," they said behind painted smiles. "She is playing a role." She heard every word, but she refused to shrink. She stood taller, met their eyes, and answered questions with quiet dignity. One night, After a particularly cruel headline in the papers, she found him pacing his office, the contract spread across his desk. "They think you are here for money," he said coldly. "And what do you think?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. Finally, he said, "I do not know." The words stung more than she expected. She wanted to shout, to remind him that it was his offer, his pen, his terms. Instead, she turned and walked out, her heart pounding. In the silence of her borrowed room, she told herself again that this was only temporary. 1 year, that was all. But deep inside, she feared the truth that this arrangement was already changing her in ways she had not agreed to, and changing him in ways he had not planned. The storm finally broke at a charity gala, one far larger than the first night they had crossed paths. The ballroom glittered with gold and crystal, but the air was heavy with judgment. She arrived on his arm, her gown borrowed from a stylist, her smile carefully practiced. Cameras flashed as if they were proof of perfection, but behind the polished lenses, whispers spread like wildfire. "She is nothing more than a gold digger. She was serving drinks only months ago. Look at her pretending to belong." Each cruel remark pierced her like a needle, but she stood tall, refusing to let them see her pain. Still, when his former lover appeared, draped in diamonds and arrogance, the sting cut deeper. "I see you have upgraded your accessories," the woman sneered softly, her voice just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Though, I must say, she looks more like an employee than a wife." For a moment, the young woman's resolve wavered. She forced a polite smile and excused herself, retreating to the edge of the hall where shadows offered some relief. Her chest ached, her vision blurred. She had promised herself she would never cry in front of these people, but their words pressed hard against her pride. She was about to slip away entirely when she felt a hand close around hers. He stood beside her, his expression unreadable but his grip steady. "Stay," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. "Why? So they can laugh more?" His gaze swept over the crowd, sharp as glass. Then, with a calm that silenced the nearest whispers, he pulled her closer, his arm sliding firmly around her waist. "Let them laugh," he murmured. "I will not." For the first time, he shielded her not with wealth, but with presence. Conversations faltered, stares shifted. No one dared challenge the silent message. She was not to be mocked. Yet when the night ended and they returned to the mansion, the cracks were already widening. She sat alone in her room, replaying every cruel word, every headline that had painted her as desperate and manipulative. She could not shake the thought that perhaps he believed it too. The next morning she confronted him in his office. The contract lay open on his desk, as if it mocked her. "Is this all I am to you?" she demanded. "A signature on paper? A convenient lie?" He looked up slowly, his face carved from stone. "Do you think I would have chosen you if I believed the lies they say? Then why do you never deny them?" Her voice cracked, raw with hurt. "Why do you let them say I am a fraud, that I am here for money?" His silence was worse than any accusation. For a moment, she thought he would confess something, anything, but he only turned away, as if her pain was too much to bear. Her hands trembled. "I cannot keep doing this." "Oh." She left the office before he could stop her, her heart breaking with every step. She wanted to walk out of the mansion entirely, but the memory of her mother's frail smile, the machines that kept her alive, held her back. She was trapped between pride and survival, torn apart by both. That night, unable to sleep, she found herself in the garden, the moon casting silver across the fountain. She thought she was alone until she heard footsteps. He was there, no jacket, no mask of power, just a man with shadows under his eyes. "You are stronger than all of them," he said quietly. "Stronger than me." Her chest ached at the words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that behind the cold exterior was someone who saw her worth. But trust was dangerous, and she could not afford to give it freely. Still, for the first time, she saw something in him that was not control, not arrogance. She saw vulnerability. And that glimpse, fleeting as it was, planted a seed she could not ignore. What she did not realize was that this seed would grow in the most unexpected way, through pain, sacrifice, and the breaking of walls neither of them thought they would ever let fall. The weeks after the gala felt heavier than the marble walls of his mansion. She threw herself into caring for her mother, balancing hospital visits with the endless expectations of her contract. Sleep became a luxury she could no longer afford. She smiled in public, stood beside him at events, and pretended the whispers no longer touched her. But inside, her strength was wearing thin. One late evening, after returning from the hospital, she stumbled through the front door. The hall spun around her, her breath shallow, her body too weak to fight anymore. She collapsed against the polished floor, the world slipping into black. When she opened her eyes, she was in a different room. The air smelled faintly of cedar and cologne. The bed was softer than anything she had known. And sitting beside her was him. No suit, no mask of indifference, just a man with worry carved deep into his features. "You should have told me," he said, his voice low but urgent. "You cannot keep pushing yourself like this." She blinked, her throat dry. "Why would you care? It is only a contract." His jaw tightened, but he did not answer right away. Instead, he reached to the nightstand and picked up something she had not realized was there, her small sketchbook. Its cover was worn, edges frayed from years of use. "I found this when they brought you in," he said. He flipped it open carefully, as though it were fragile. Inside were her dreams sketched in pencil tiny houses with flower boxes, a bakery she once wanted to open, a park bench where she imagined sitting with her mother. No mansions, no diamonds, just simple pieces of a life she longed for. "These are your dreams?" he asked softly. She turned her face away, embarrassed. "They are foolish. They are not for someone like me." For the first time, his voice lost all its coldness. "They are not foolish. They are real. They are more real than anything in this house." Her chest tightened, unsure how to respond. No one had ever looked at her with that kind of sincerity before. She had seen him command entire boardrooms without flinching, but now his eyes betrayed something he never allowed anyone else to see. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because I do not want you to think you are alone," he said. "Because I am beginning to realize that this—" he held up the contract still lying on the table, "is not the reason I want you here." The words hung between them, heavy, dangerous, and undeniable. She shook her head, fighting the swell of emotion. "Do not say things you do not mean. This arrangement was your idea. Do not make it crueler by pretending it could be more." He leaned closer, his gaze steady. "It is not pretense, not anymore." Her breath caught, her pulse racing. But before she could answer, the weight of exhaustion pulled her back under. She drifted into sleep with his words echoing in her mind, words that terrified her more than any contract could. The next morning, she found the sketchbook placed neatly beside her pillow, his fountain pen lying across it. But instead of a signature waiting to be written, there was a note in his hand. "Dreams are not meant to be erased. Do not give up yours." She touched the ink, her chest aching with confusion. This was not the man she thought he was. He was still infuriating, still controlling, still bound by pride, but now she had glimpsed something else. And she knew that once a glimpse was seen, it could not be unseen. What began as a cold transaction was shifting into something dangerous. Something that neither of them could hide behind contracts or staged smiles. And though she feared it, she also felt it the first fragile thread of something real, pulling them closer with every passing day. The fragile peace between them did not last long. Rumors grew louder, carried through headlines and whispered at every event. His family, restless and suspicious, decided to act. One evening, she was summoned to a dinner, not in the mansion, but in the family's private estate, a place that felt colder despite its wealth. The table was lined with relatives she barely knew, but their eyes cut into her with sharp intent. His father, a man who never wasted words, set a folder on the table. Inside was another contract, its purpose cruelly clear an annulment. "This will end quietly," his father said. "You will leave with a generous sum, and the charade will be over. Our son will marry someone suitable." Her hands shook as she looked at the papers. It was as if all her sacrifices, all her struggles, had been reduced to a disposable arrangement. She lifted her eyes to him, hoping he would speak, that he would stand beside her. But his silence stretched, heavy and unbearable. Pain burned through her chest. "So this was it all along," she said bitterly. "I was never a wife, only a placeholder until you found someone worthy." He finally looked at her, his expression torn between anger and regret. "It is not what you think. "Then tell me what it is," she demanded, her voice trembling. "Tell me why I signed your contract, endured their ridicule, stood beside you, and why you will not even defend me now." His jaw tightened, but no words came. Her vision blurred with unshed tears. She pushed the folder across the table, the papers sliding back toward his father. "If you want me gone, you do not need my signature. I will not beg to stay where I am not wanted." With that, she stood and walked out, her heels echoing against the marble floor. Behind her, the room erupted in tense murmurs, but she did not look back. By the time she reached the car waiting outside, her heart felt like it was breaking apart piece by piece. She had believed, for one fleeting moment, that he saw her for who she was, that maybe, behind the contract and the lies, something real had taken root. But silence had spoken louder than any promise. And in that silence, she realized she could no longer fight for a place that was never meant for her. The next morning, the city's financial press was buzzing with anticipation. His family had arranged a critical shareholders' meeting to finalize his position at the head of the company. Without their approval, his control would vanish. He was expected to comply with their terms, to announce his engagement to a woman they deemed acceptable, and to erase the scandal of his contract marriage. But when he walked into the grand conference hall, filled with reporters and investors, his steps carried a different weight. Cameras clicked rapidly, ready to capture the face of a man chained by tradition. He stood at the podium, the family seated like judges behind him. The annulment papers lay ready on the table, waiting for his signature. His father's eyes demanded obedience. He took a deep breath, and then, with steady hands, he pushed the folder aside. "I have been told to end my marriage," he began, his voice carrying across the room. "I have been told that it is a contract, a performance, nothing more. But what they do not understand is that what began as an arrangement has become something else entirely." The room shifted uneasily, whispers rising. His mother's face blanched, his father's jaw hardened. "Still," he continued, "I will not sign away the only truth I have found. I will not give up the woman who stood beside me when everyone else doubted. If it costs me this company, then so be it. I can rebuild an empire. But I cannot rebuild a heart once it is broken." Gasps echoed through the hall. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing. His father slammed a hand against the table, but it was too late. The declaration had already spread beyond those walls. In that moment, he laid everything bare, not wealth, not status, but his heart. The man who once treated marriage as a transaction had just torn up his own family's rules to protect the woman they called unworthy. Across the city, she sat alone in her small apartment, unaware of the storm he had unleashed. But soon, she would see the headlines. Soon, she would hear his words replayed on every channel. "The only contract I want to keep is her heart." And for the first time, the world would see not just a millionaire, but a man who chose love over power. She saw it first on the small television in her apartment, the same one she had bought secondhand years ago. The news anchors replayed his speech, word for word, their voices filled with disbelief. Headlines flashed across the screen: "Millionaire defies family for wife," and "Love over power, a public stand." Her hands trembled as she pressed the volume higher, hearing him declare to the world that the only contract he wanted to keep was her heart. The man she had believed too cold to care had chosen her over an empire. Tears blurred her vision. For weeks she had carried the weight of shame, convinced she was nothing more than a pawn. Now, in front of millions, he had broken every expectation to prove otherwise. A knock echoed at her door. She rushed to open it, and there he stood, not in a tailored suit, not with cameras at his back, but simply a man holding a familiar fountain pen in his hand. He extended it toward her, his voice steady but tender. "The first time you used this pen, it was to sign a contract that chained us both. Today, I want you to use it for something real." She stared at him, her heart racing. "What are you asking me?" He unfolded a crisp sheet of paper. It was not filled with clauses or deadlines. It was a marriage license. "This time there is no arrangement, no conditions, only choice. Will you write your name beside mine?" For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then she reached out, her fingers brushing the pen that had once felt like a shackle. Now, it felt like freedom. With tears streaming down her face, she wrote her name. When she finished, he pulled her close, his voice breaking as he whispered, "No family, no contract, no fortune will ever matter more than this." Her mother, frail but smiling, watched from her chair as they signed the final line together. For once, there was no performance, no audience, only truth. The fountain pen, once a symbol of control, had become the seal of something unbreakable. And as they stood together, bound not by paper but by choice, one truth shone brighter than the chandeliers, brighter than the headlines. Love had rewritten the contract, forever.